I think there's a couple of notices that landlords should never bother giving. And I'll start with those because sometimes when you get that packet from the court system, there's some notices in there and you're like, ooh, that's exactly what I want to use. And it's just shit. And so don't use it. If you want, there's a few errors on those documents, and I'll just give a free plug. I have a random website that a random intern built for me years and years ago, where we host free copies of notices that work at court. Just go grab them. They're PDFs. You can just print them out. If you type in eviction Alaskan, or damn it, what is the damn thing? I'm going to type it in now. Yeah, evictionalaska.com. There's a box you can click on that's sample notices, and then it has landlord notices with underlining on it. You can click on it, and it just opens PDFs. You can print it off. So from the list of things that you just shouldn't use, you shouldn't use a 24-hour notice of intentional damage. Shouldn't use it. You shouldn't ever use intentional damage ever as a reason for eviction. I know that sounds bonkers. If anybody wants me to explain, I'd be happy to explain. But it should never be used. You should just convert it into a reimbursement for fixing the thing they broke. Okay. You should never do a notice on the utilities. There's this weird notice out there that says you can give a 3-day notice that's also a 5-day notice for utilities. Judges are not good at math. Don't do that one. Just convert it to a different one. There's a couple other notices out there and then the big one that people want to use because it feels right, it's wrong. And that is notice for illegal activities. Don't use that. That is an absolute trap for all amateur landlords out there or amateur attorneys out there. And if you bring that in, you will never make it. It's just not going to happen. And there's a couple of reasons for that. If anybody wants me to go into my will, very briefly, that statute specifies a couple of very specific activities that it considers legal. It does not count just about everything else. Those activities tend to be things related to gambling, prostitution, or the creation of alcohol. Everything else, like drugs, drugs, the big thing, it's not listed. So don't use it because it's a trap. Okay, so the notices you should be using, let's say you have a 100 unit. Every single month, you should, by numbers, you're probably going to be posting a couple of different types of notice. 7-day notice for non-payment of rent. That is your best friend. Use that all the time. Don't include late fees. Don't include any other cost or fees. Don't include this or that or a processing charge. Just put the amount of rent that they didn't pay, and then when they pay that, great. Apply it to all their stuff, and then the next month do the same thing again and waive the late fee. If you're comfortable with that month after month, perfect. If you're not, use the generally accepted accounting principles and apply it to the oldest charges. And then slowly you will end up with an amount of rent that remains unpaid even when they pay a base amount. There's a trick. If you ever want to know, you can probably ask Ayla, or you can ask an attorney. We'll tell you how it goes. Okay. You should be using 24-hour notices of entry or 48-hour notices of entry. These are wonderful. You have to give a reason for this. And if they want to reschedule to a more reasonable time, you have to coordinate with them. But generally, the best way you get a chance to go into a unit to see if they're smoking or growing. Well, this used to be it, where they grow pot. Now that doesn't matter so much. You would say you need to check on the utilities. You need to check on the windowsills. You need to check to make sure that basic things around the house are working. You go in, you check on those things. You're not allowed to snoop, but you're allowed to check out the main things that you need to know as a landlord, like is the gas hooked up to the stove still? Does the stove turn on? Is the hot water heater working? Do the windows close all the way? Are the windows broken? Like basic stuff. And then don't take pictures of personal items. Don't evict people for weird stuff that they do in their homes if it's not a violation. All right. And then 10-day notices. Well, we'll wait for 10-day notices. And then 30-day notices for terminating a tenancy. This is for month-to-month tenancies or for tenancies that are coming to the end of the lease term. In order to give one of these notices, you have to look at the date that is the expiration of the lease that you want to look at and have be the final day that you can stay there. Let's say it's December 1st. Then you count backwards 30 days and you say, hey, I could give this notice on November 1st, but that's a little tight. So instead, your attorney is going to say, you need to give it on October 31st for that to be valid. It works even more strangely when you look at February. So if you want to evict somebody on March 1st, you need to be giving a notice on January 29th or before. And it doesn't really matter what day in January or before you give it, because you could give 59 days notice. It doesn't change anything. The difference between 59 days notice and 31 days notice means nothing. The expiration date is always the same, which is the day that rent is due next. That is more than 30 days from the day that you give it. That's it. That works. During COVID, I'll just say it like this. During COVID, that's what we did. And it worked beautifully. We didn't have a slowdown at all in COVID. If you guys did, should have went to me. Okay. So the last two notices that you should be using very heavily are going to be 10-day notices. And this is for a violation of any clause in the lease. A violation of any lease, and usually my recommendation to my clients, not to you guys, but to my clients, is to convert any violation of a lease to money. And if it can't be converted into a violation or converted into money, then it's probably not a great violation to evict on. Certain exceptions will apply, certain very specific exceptions will apply. It needs to be something that can be counted. Sometimes vehicles in parking spots can be counted, sometimes other things that can be counted, but you don't want to be evicting based upon smoking. Smoking is really difficult to count. It's just hard. And so you want to be converting it into other things. You give a 10-day notice. 10 days, you make that notice due. Every notice that I tell you to give, you need to be looking at the day that the number of days that it says, oh, it's due on the 7th day. It's a 7-day notice. Do it at 9 a.m. of the following day. Make it a 7.5-day notice. Make it a 10.5-day notice. Make it a 30.5-day notice. Something like that. All right. So for a 10-day notice, you make it due on the morning of the 11th. If they cure the activity or cure the violation that's listed in that notice, and we'll use an example. Ayla gives a notice that says, hey, you guys are supposed to have electricity in your name. You didn't. So rather than giving them a notice saying, hook the electricity back up, you give a notice that says, the owner paid it. You now owe the owner $378.10. Pay it within 10 days. Here's the deadline. It's the 11th day. If they go to the 10th day and they pay it, fine, whatever. Do it again the next month. If you get to the 11th day and they haven't paid it, you can now give a 5-day notice because they are repeating the violation. It is the second violation within 6 months for the same or similar situation. And now you can terminate them and set them up for an eviction. Don't give 5-day notices if you don't want to evict. If you simply want to collect your money, and if you don't collect your money, you're still okay for this tenant to stay on because you like getting their rent money, do not give 5-day notices. You will make your record, your paperwork, look bad. If you want to give an extension or more leeway to this tenant, so let's say Ayla's person didn't pay electricity, comes in, and on the 12th day, they bring in the money. If she had given a 5-day notice, now she's got a problem with her paperwork. But if she had a feeling that her landlord would be okay with it, and she was like, well, I'm going to wait till the next month and see what happens, and we'll give them another notice. She's now been in a situation where that decision was justified. If you want to give an extension, instead of just doing what I've described as Ayla perhaps doing, of waiting to the 12th day, on the 11th day, you could just give another 10-day notice for the exact same violation. The only thing that changes are the dates. And you could do that over and over again. And it just acts like a bookmark in a book that you keep moving to the page that you're currently on. And it resets the 6-month window for when you can give a 5-day notice. That has to happen within 6 months of the first, or well, of the most recent 10-day notice where it's a similar violation. All right. This can get a little bit tricky, but generally, those are the notices I recommend you give. There's a few others out there, and we can talk about it. Abandonment notice, you mentioned you wanted to hear about.
Yep.
You should define that in your lease in a clause. If a property remains empty for this long, it will be considered abandoned. the traditional time period is 7 days. So if it remains abandoned, you then give essentially your abandonment notice that I recommend people give is a 10-day notice. On the 8th day that they've not been there, you give a notice that says in 10 days, if you're not back in this property, we're going to evict you. Great. And if they're not there at the end of the 10 day, you give a 5-day notice and you're done. You treat it just like a normal violation. But the abandonment notice is essentially just another reason to evict them. Some attorneys will recommend you use different notices for all these things. My experience has been that if you take these different reasons for evicting people and you put them into 10-day notices, judges like that, and judges will grant those. And at the end of the day, we just want to have our eviction granted, and we don't want anybody to ask any questions about it. We just want to go in, get out, and be done with it. So you make them all into 10-day notices.
Awesome. That's great advice. Let me ask a question from a client who couldn't be here today, but they wanted your advice on this. One of a building they just purchased, or excuse me, a building they just sold. The tenant went to jail, had not paid rent. Now we're trying to give some good advice to the new owner who unfortunately inherited this tenant. Nobody was aware they went to jail. They can't pay their rent. What is the best course of action here? This is not a great tenant. They've wanted to evict them. Could you post a notice of abandonment as an example of the apartment? Or do you need
You could, but if they're late on rent, you just post the late rent notice.
Okay, that's going to be the more effective way of getting keys back to the apartment.
Yes, you could. So just as a reminder to everybody, when you post one of these notices, if the notice remains uncured at the end of the notice, technically the tenancy is terminated. And then, as long as the landlord knows that nobody's inside the unit, you can recover possession of the unit. If you go inside and there's something with a heartbeat inside, don't recover possession. If you have a 7-day notice, your guy's in jail, you post a 7-day notice on the 8th day, or maybe even on the 7th day, you say, here's a 24-hour notice of entry. I'm coming in tomorrow to check to see if you're there. You go in on that morning, and if nobody's there, change the locks, and you're done. Then you post your normal security deposit stuff. You post your normal 15-day notice for abandoned personal property for them to pick it up. And then 15 days later, when they don't come pick up their TV and their couch, you junk it all and you move on with your life.
Now, at the end of that 7 days, could somebody move the stuff but keep it in a location where tenants could get it and then turn the apartment?
Yeah, you could. This is where an attorney is going to answer this different than a property manager.
I see.
An attorney says, hey, that's a lot of risk to move somebody's belongings. If something happens or if something's damaged, that's more risk than is probably justified by putting a tenant in there a few days early. So as an attorney, I would say it's in a place where the tenant thought it was appropriate to keep it there for the 15 days. And then the most that you lose is 1/2 month of rent. To me, as a risk analysis, that makes more sense. To property managers, sometimes that doesn't make any sense if you've got a shed on site. So that's just a call. As long as the personal property here, is kept in a safe and secure location, you're good. When you move items, though, you open yourself up to the most classic of counterclaims from a tenant, which is, you stole my stuff. And even if they recover most of it, they'll be like, and I also had a $15,000 guitar. Okay, I do see a question over there, and it's related to some of this stuff.
Yep. So this one says, with many Alaskan tenants that work remote, the 24-hour inspection notice is posted on the door and not removed seen because they're out of town. Is further an action needed to enter?
No. This is going to, I'll say this, and if anybody clips this, it's going to sound kind of funny. Jail is really good for this as an example, and jail is one of the most convenient things to happen in eviction, because if you know that they're in jail and you can monitor them in jail as far as whether they've been arraigned and if their bail is set at $1 million, you have a pretty good idea of where they're going to be for the next while. And sometimes it works like that, even with like a DUI or something smaller, if they just can't get out. So it works the same for people in jail as it does for remote, but it's easier to explain for the people in jail. So if you know that that person's not there, you cannot be certain that they don't have a girlfriend or a boyfriend or an adult child who's living there that probably shouldn't be, but that is something that you have to deal with as a very foreseeable possibility. So you still post the same notice. You still go into the unit in the same way. If you walk into a unit as a landlord and you open it up and there is a partially undressed person in there, you're going to back out, make sure that everything's okay before you go back in. You're going to treat that situation the exact same, whether that's the tenant or somebody else. And so whether the tenant is present in jail or working remote, up at the slope, whatever it might be, that notice serves the same purpose, does the same thing. If you want to be extra careful, change your 24-hour notice to a 48-hour notice, and you're still going to be covered by the law. You are good to go. Do not access if it seems unreasonable. If the tenant calls you or sends you an email and says, hey, my mom saw your notice and I'm not going to be there. I don't want you coming into my place while I'm not there. If it's a reasonable request and it's not an emergency, you should probably wait until they get back from the slope. If it is an emergency and you say, hey, I've got to go in there, the hot water heater stopped working and it's December, you got to go in.